Most people think self-doubt comes from inside, like you're just an overthinker or you lack confidence. But a lot of doubt doesn't start with you. It gets planted, not by obvious bullies, not by loud critics, by people who sound calm, curious, even supportive. They ask questions that look innocent, but the real purpose is to shrink you, slow you down, and make you second-guess decisions you were actually sure about. And here's the pattern. They don't improvise. They tend to use the same 5 trap questions over and over. In this video, we'll step through those 5 questions. Once you learn them, you'll hear them instantly. You'll notice the tug before you follow it, and you'll know exactly what to say without getting defensive, without arguing, without losing your peace. Let's lay them out. Here's why these questions mess with your head. When someone asks a question, your brain assumes there's a good reason for it. You want to be reasonable. You want to be understood. You want to answer well. So you search for the right explanation. You start giving details, you start justifying, you start proving you're allowed to choose what you chose. And that's where self-doubt begins. Because the moment you start defending a decision you already made, your brain hears, maybe I'm not fully sure. Trap questions aren't about curiosity. They're about control. They create a tiny emotional wobble, and then they wait to see if you hand them your confidence. Here's your rule for this entire video. If a question makes you shrink, you're allowed to answer it with a boundary, not an explanation. You don't owe anyone a front row seat to your certainty. Let's step through those questions. Trap question number 1. Why would you do that? It sounds normal, neutral, logical, but notice what it assumes, that your choice is suspicious, that it needs a defense. A common mistake is, you start building a case, you list reasons, you overshare, you try to make it make sense to them. Here's why it backfires. Because you just accepted their frame. My choice needs your approval. Now they're the judge, you're the applicant. And once someone becomes the judge, they'll always find something to challenge. Here's how to respond. Because it works for me. For example, they ask, why would you switch jobs now? You say, because it works for me. If they push, you respond, I'm comfortable with my decision. Here's why it works. It closes the debate without being rude. It keeps your autonomy intact. And it quietly signals, this isn't a discussion. Trap question number 2. Are you sure? This one is disguised as concern, but it often functions as a seed of doubt. The common mistake is, you panic and start proving you thought it through. You explain every detail of your plan like you're trying to calm their anxiety. Here's why it backfires. Because doubt is contagious. The more you try to reassure them, the more your brain starts scanning for what could go wrong. And if the person asking is actually insecure or competitive, they don't want clarity. They want hesitation. Here's how to respond. Yes, I'm sure enough to try. For example, they ask, are you sure you want to do that? It seems risky. You respond, yes, I'm sure enough to try. If they keep going, I've decided, I'll adjust as I go. Here's why it works. Because it removes the false requirement of being 100% certain before you act. It keeps you in motion. And motion is where confidence is built. Trap question number 3. Who told you that? Or where did you hear that? This one is sneaky. It's not about learning, it's about discrediting. It's the question people ask when they don't want to engage your point, so they attack the source. The mistake is, you scramble for credibility. You start listing books, videos, mentors, evidence, personal history, anything to sound legit. Why it backfires? Because you're now arguing about sources instead of truth. And if someone's goal is to undermine you, no source will ever be good enough. Here's what to say instead. It's been my experience and it works for me. For example, you say, I'm not available last minute anymore. They respond, who told you that? TikTok? You reply, it's been my experience and it works for me. Why it works? It separates 2 things. Your right to choose and their opinion about your reasoning. You don't need receipts to protect your peace. Trap question number 4. Don't you think you're being too sensitive? This is one of the most damaging ones because it doesn't attack your idea. It attacks your emotional reality. It implies your perception is flawed. The common mistake is you start defending your feelings. You try to explain why it hurt, why it matters, why you're not overreacting. Here's why it backfires. Because now you're arguing for the legitimacy of your own experience, and the person gets to keep crossing the line while you keep pleading your case. The truth is, you can't win an argument against someone who benefits from your self-doubt. How to respond. I'm not debating my feelings. I'm telling you what I won't accept. For example, they say, "Wow, you're really sensitive." You respond, "I'm not debating my feelings. That tone doesn't work with me." Here's why it works. Because it shifts from emotion to standard. Standards don't need approval, they need follow-through. Trap question number 5. Why can't you just be normal? Or, what's wrong with you? This is the most aggressive trap question, and the reason it's powerful is shame. It tries to brand you as defective for having needs, boundaries, preferences, or a different pace. The common mistake? You collapse into proving you're not difficult. You over-apologize. You over-accommodate. You shrink back into who you used to be. Here's why it backfires. Because shame is a leash. If they can make you feel wrong, they can make you easy to control. And the longer you try to earn normal, the more you abandon yourself. How to respond instead. Nothing's wrong with me. I'm allowed to be the way I am. For example, they ask, "Why can't you just be normal and come with us?" You say, "Nothing's wrong with me. I'm allowed to be the way I am." Here's why it works. Because it ends the shame negotiation. It tells your nervous system, "I'm safe with me." And that's where calm confidence comes from. Here's the filter that makes all this simple. When someone asks you a question that makes you doubt yourself, pause and ask, is this question trying to understand me or trying to control me? Supportive questions sound like, what do you need? How can I support you? What's your plan? Trap questions sound like, are you sure? Over and over. Why would you do that? With judgment. Who told you that? To discredit. So sensitive? To invalidate. What's wrong with you? To shame. Once you hear the difference, you can't unhear it. This week, don't try to master all 5. Pick one trap question you hear the most, and choose one clean response. Because it works for me. Yes, I'm sure enough to try. It's been my experience, and it works for me. I'm not debating my feelings. Nothing's wrong with me. I'm allowed to be the way I am. Then stop talking. Let silence do the heavy lifting. Your confidence doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be non-negotiable. If this helped you, the simplest free way you can support the channel is to hit subscribe. Thank you for tuning in. And remember, calm is a strategy, not a personality. You've got this.